Hello, welcome back to another episode of Denmark 101. Today I am going to try and give a super quick run through of the Copenhagen neighborhoods, at least within central Copenhagen. Now this will be a little bit of a challenge, but it's largely going to be a challenge because my pronunciation is, as you are well aware, quite horrendous. So I apologize for that. But let's start in the city center. So at the very heart of Copenhagen, you have the city center. In the city center, this is the old historic medieval core. It was surrounded by the city wall. It was surrounded by the moat, which is now the Copenhagen lakes, the 5 lakes in the north. And then on the south, then you have Christianshavn, which is just underneath that. And if you look at a map, it is reclaimed from the swamp, from the sea. What is a sea swamp? I think it's still swamp, right? The marshland. But anyway, so it is reclaimed, and you can see where they have actually excavated the castle wall, or not castle wall, but fortification, and that kind of inches up and surrounds what is the old military base that eventually became, or has become, the free town of Christiania. And Christiania is this very small independent free town that has been quite famous, which is nestled within Christianshavn. Christianshavn sits on the island of Amager, or Amager as you're looking at it, but Amager, which is located directly below the city center. So that means that you have Christiansborg, which is the old parliament, still not old, but new and occupied. Then you have Nyhavn immediately above that, and then underneath it, Christianshavn, and then underneath that, the island of Amager. Now, the island of Amager, it gets a little confusing because the island of Amager gets talked about as an island, and it's very easy for people to confuse Copenhagen as being on a on the mainland, but instead it is on Zealand or Sjælland, depending on pronunciation and preference, as in Danish pronunciation or foreign preference, I suppose, in that situation. But Copenhagen sits on the island, the main island, which is quite large and feels almost like a mainland entity, but of course is not. But if we get back to neighborhoods, then we look at central Copenhagen. Now, if we're looking at central Copenhagen and we go straight to the north from the city center, that is Nørrebro. That is the northern borough. And the great part about actually learning the inner boroughs or the inner city names and neighborhoods is that they are basically translating over to English, just the boroughs and then the location. So we go up to Nørrebro. Nørrebro is the latest of the different neighborhoods that's being gentrified. It's experiencing heavy gentrification in the southern half. It has historically been a very immigrant-heavy area, a lot of Arab and Somali and Muslim immigrants, and then second, third generation families concentrated in that area. Then if we transition and we head up and to the right, looking at a map, then you're looking at Østerbro, which is the eastern borough. Simple enough, that is heavily gentrified. It gentrified maybe 25 years ago. It is now the place where you have a lot of 30 to 40-year-old families, successful business people who have kind of outgrown, quote unquote, perhaps Nørrebro or Vesterbro, which I'll talk about here in a second, and then have transitioned up there for something a little bit quieter, more expensive, classier. Think more cocktail bar versus dive bar. Now, if we're going back to Nørrebro and we go to the west, you would think that it would actually be Vesterbro, but first we have Frederiksberg. And Frederiksberg is an autonomous city. It used to be another city that was kind of on the outskirts of Copenhagen, but Copenhagen, as capitals tend to do, got quite large and swallowed it up. So when it swallowed it up, It has maintained its identity as a separate commune, as a separate city, but it is now very much one of kind of the central neighborhoods or central cities within central Copenhagen. Now, Frederiksberg has the business school. It's very business oriented, but it sits on the cusp, on the edge with Nørrebro. So you have some crossover there, and then southwest you have Vesterbro. And Vesterbro is now still gentrifying, but it's a little bit farther along in its gentrification process than Nørrebro is. And so that means that, well, it was perhaps rougher than Nørrebro because it had the red light district, it has the meatpacking district. It also had has a heavy kind of Arab Muslim immigrant population, but it also was where many of the Asian families settled when they came to Denmark. So it's got a little, and actually many of the Indian families, so I guess I should say Asian or East Asian and then Asian families there as well. And so that means you'll find a little bit more Indian food, you'll find some Chinese food, you'll find a lot of Thai restaurants, Thai places, things along those lines, on top of your kebab stands and places along those. But that was the one that gentrified, and it's not completely gentrified, but it's quickly turning over in that process. And many of the young hip students that moved there when it was perhaps significantly rougher and up and coming as a trendy, popular place, they've now grown up, gotten careers, gotten jobs, but many have then hung on to their apartments there, which then has turned things over. So now it's much more expensive. Perhaps not at an Osterbro or a Frederiksberg level, but it's still not northern Nørrebro cheap or old school Østerbro cheap. Having said that, you still do have a lot of the charm and the presence and the diversity of places to eat and cultural elements that historically made it so attractive. So that's basically your inner neighborhoods. Then you have another ring on the outside of that, which outside of Nordvest, which is just north of Nørrebro, I'm not going to dive into in this video, but when you do look at Nordvest, which is the northern half of Nørrebro, or the northern third on top of it, that is the neighborhood that kind of is continuing to gentrify as gentrification kind of pushes up and consumes its way up through Nørrebro. And so that's still where it's becoming, one of the major up and coming areas. And again, there's cheaper real estate, a lot of great food, a wonderful cultural diversity, all of those different things as you get up there. But you have the graffiti and little dive coffee shops and things like that. So anyway, each of these neighborhoods, even though it's all very compact, I mean, you can probably walk from northern Osterbro to southwestern Vesterbro in 45 minutes, if you were so inclined. They each have a very distinct personality, and they're all very, very much worth exploring. I suppose the one thing that I need to elaborate on a little bit more is Amager. I think I kind of started to skip Amager, which is naughty. So you have Christianshavn, and then immediately underneath Christianshavn you have Amager. And that's basically, in this context, I'm talking about the northern half of Amager. And Amager is also gentrifying very quickly. It's where the largest University of Copenhagen campus is, the humanities campus down there, which has over 11,000 students. There's a lot of student housing. The IT university is down there. You have wonderful beaches, the artificial beach of Amagerstrand, which is 4.5 kilometers long, man-made barrier beach, so it's very nice sand and absolutely lovely. And you do have, it used to be a very rough area and kind of up and coming and very open. And a lot of it was reserved as parks or marshlands and things along those lines as well. And so that is also changing very quickly, but it doesn't quite have the hip and trendy identity as perhaps a Nørrebro or definitely Vesterbro, but it does have, like, let's call it maybe a more, not authentic, but more traditionally Danish, but urban working class Danish heritage and identity. Old brick buildings that were warehouses and things along those lines. So Hopefully that has been a useful crash course to the neighborhoods of Copenhagen. Let me know what your personal relationship is with the different central Copenhagen neighborhoods. And I apologize for those of you in the rest of Denmark. I know that there are some very exciting neighborhoods in Aarhus and Odense and Aalborg, and that there is so much to explain about those cities. Maybe let's talk in the comments about how those should be covered in future Denmark 101 episodes. As always, thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you so much for your likes, subscribing, comments, sharing the videos, you name it. I absolutely love it. And stay tuned for next time. I have lots more coming soon.